Hello, welcome to another MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar in our MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar series. Today's discussion is going to be so exciting. It's real life content success stories with artificial intelligence, and we're calling it AI Really Works, Content Success Stories. And my guest today is a data scientist from an amazing company based in Ohio, and I'm going to tease it a little bit further while I set up some housekeeping. I'm Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer of MarketMuse. And as you know, MarketMuse sets the standard for content quality with our content intelligence platform. If you're not using it, your content is not as good as your competitors. All right, now, setting a little bit of housekeeping. Two things. One, you're going to get this recording in the next few months. Just kidding. Next few days, and you can go check that out. While you're at it, go type in content strategy webinars into Google and look up MarketMuse. We have a list of nearly 100 backlogs from people like Yasmin from 2 Octobers, from team members from companies like Rasa, Arrow, Andy Crestadina did one on analytics with us. I mean, there's tons of them for you to check out. Anything that you care about related to content, search, artificial intelligence, anything in between. Go check them out. Download a couple of them, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on Twitter, tell me what you thought. Okay, again, ask us anything about content success stories. Ask us anything about artificial intelligence, no matter how big or small. We're going to get to it in line or at the end. We're going to leave some room for a specific question and answer session. All right, not to bury the important piece of information. Joining us from Pandata, Bob Wood is a data scientist, and I am so happy that I get to go to Cleveland twice a year, typically with Content Marketing World and with Macon, and have hung out with, talked to, everything related to Pandata and a number of companies who are in that region. But also it attracts people from all over the country and the world. But Bob, thanks for joining us today. I'm so excited to talk about this topic. Can you tell us a little bit about Pandata and then also your journey there?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you for including me. So to talk a little bit about Pandata, as you kind of already mentioned, so we are Cleveland-based, AI machine learning, and we are a consultancy that works with both local and out-of-state innovative organizations, and we help them to design, develop trustworthy, human-centered AI. So we like to think about things creatively and build those relationships and solve the problems that our clients may be facing, and with a very strong focus on what we can do to build AI that is trusted by the organizations and to which we are deploying it. So that is kind of Pandata in a nutshell, and a little bit about what we do. I can talk about my career journey and background, as it is a little bit unusual as well. So we have a minute, I can get into that.
For sure. Yeah, please tell us.
So what we have on our team, which is a fairly small team of data scientists and consultants, that we have a diverse backgrounds, absolutely, and mine is kind of no different. So my background is actually in mechanical engineering by education. So I actually got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And went on to get my Master of Engineering Management from Case Western Reserve, which anyone who's familiar with Cleveland and knows is a local university, and then went on to work for over a decade in a number of different states and regions, everywhere from here to New England to out in Southern California. And I was working in aerospace manufacturing for various companies, both in supervisory roles and a lot in quality management roles. And made a decision after obviously many years of being within that environment and that kind of a role, that I wanted to look for something else for myself, and made that decision a few years back. Took a step back and kind of evaluated my strengths, what I wanted to be getting out of my career, and the direction that I decided to look into was into data science and see what it would look like to get involved and get up to the skill set that I would need to become a data scientist eventually. And came across a boot camp actually that was back at Case. So 15 years after I graduated, I was back on campus again doing that. And so went ahead and enrolled in that, left the job that I was in, went ahead and did that for 6 months, completed boot camp, which was my first exposure to, to programming since undergrad, and got back into that a little bit now with a very heavy emphasis on Python and working with that. And following that, went out and started interviewing around, and was already well aware of Pandata, as well known within, especially Northeast Ohio, but the region, and was able to get in as a data analyst there. And I've been on the team for over 2 years now, and now a data scientist there, and it's been great every step of the way.
That's such a cool story. And the reason why it's really cool, I mean, my background's in computer science. You're an engineer. You talk about people who are, want to be in the data science field, who want to implement artificial intelligence, but don't have like a traditional background in, mathematics or computer science. It's possible. And it's something that, the technical search engine optimization field is driving towards this as well. It's something that a lot of content marketers and CMOs are, trying to get good at this stuff. And one of the ways we can do that is working with teams that are already there, working with Pandata, working with, individuals who have, just project level expertise, maybe not traditional expertise, and mixing all that together can really be awesome. Jim also mentions Jim Caruso. He's a case grad. Very pumped. Thanks for joining us, Jim. I appreciate that. So, I mean, another thing that you mentioned that I think is, I always talk about data science is super sexy in the SEO world right now. And it primarily surfaced in from the technical SEO community. But what I'm seeing now is a lot of folks, presenting use cases that involve content, that involve websites, that involve generating data that's strategic from a content perspective. But I wanted to key on one thing that you said is what Pandata focuses on. It's getting teams to trust AI. Now, so where does that come from? Where does the word, why does getting teams to trust so important to adoption? And then I want to start diving into examples.
Sure thing. And I think the idea behind getting a team to, trust a solution that is being put into place largely comes from, I think, both our, observation and our experience, as well as it's been a very strong trend, especially lately, and emphasis on what you can do to try to build trust in these kinds of solutions, because it is one of the top reasons that these kinds of initiatives or projects will fail. Right. Mm-hmm. If that trust isn't there, if it is not able to be, spread throughout the team that will be making use of it, is trusting the results, and also understanding enough about how those, say, model results are generated to be able to, to build that trust. And it is something that in a lot of cases does take some iterations and take some time. But there's also been a very heavy emphasis on the machine learning side, and not to get too down in the weeds, but to see what can be done to try to come up with and use, or identify and use, I guess, fewer of the black box models and more explainability and interpretability to be able to, at the end of the day, go through and say, here is an example, and here is why this prediction was made. Here are the factors that were used by the model and its determination, to start to bridge any of the gaps that might be there, to help understand where they're coming from. Because if you're just getting responses from a model, it is tougher to, in a lot of cases, build that kind of trust.
No, I completely agree, and it's something that Paul from Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute, Paul Reitzer, and we have spoken about in the past. It's that once you start getting predictions that are doing stuff that you couldn't have done on your own, or you couldn't have done with if-then statements, then the brain starts to, okay, maybe I can start to trust this more. So I always like to tell teams is try to coach your audiences internally to say, hey, the goal of us working together on this project isn't for you to find errors in the output. It's not for you to go, that's not right. It's for you to figure out ways that this can actually become implemented, for this can become, part of our workflow, it may need more work. There may be iterations, but that's expected. Setting expectations with AI is so critical. I mean, I think you're seeing this now with natural language generation everywhere. People's expectation that it's going to be one thing and it's actually another. Their first inclination is to poop on it. It's like, no, that's terrible. But the reality is you can generate a path for this to be a, groundbreaking piece of your arsenal. And a couple of the projects that we're going to talk about today that you've shared with me, I'm really excited about them. And I'd love for you to talk about how you set up expectations, what were those outcomes, and then everywhere in between. Let's get started with that. You had mentioned one thing that's really important to, or one of the projects that's important to you was related to transcription and transcripts, very relevant for listening to this on a webinar. Obviously, what types of transcripts? Is it webinar stuff? Do you do calls? Or what types of things have you focused on?
Yeah, and I guess maybe to preface and before we get into that, is you mentioned the iterative nature, and certainly all of data science is iterative, and we certainly like to have those conversations up front, before we delve in and get involved with a project, is make sure that to set expectations at an appropriate level, depending on the depth and complexity of what we plan to or expect to be getting into, and a lot of times have kind of an initial period that involves getting a closer look and understanding of the data to make sure that we can speak to or hear what the expectations should be, and how many iterations we would potentially expect to see before we would get to something we may call a final solution. Or even an initial solution in certain states. So there is that part that always does go into it, and that we do definitely make sure to communicate to make sure that everyone is on the same page with that. So that's a really relevant point, and something that's worth always keeping in mind, as the first solution is rarely going to be the last, right? But the case that you mentioned there was actually a project that we did work on, and in that case, we're working with a client that had unstructured and not even text in this point. A lot has been made about working with NLP with unstructured text fields and doing a lot of different things from there. And this was a step removed from that, and there were actually call center recordings. So audio files that, and actually the first step was to work out the pipeline needed to be able to retrieve those actual audio files of the call center recordings and then work with them from there. But we were able to go through and do that. In that case, it was actually the Vonage API that makes that available to be able to go and pull in those recordings with all the authentication involved and needed there. But pulling in those recordings and then being able to use a transcription service, and there are multiple out there. In this case, I think we used IBM's voice-to-text service to be able to do that, to get the transcription and the diarization to be able to recognize speaker one versus speaker two, and allow us to be able to then separate those two out. And with what is out there now, it actually does a pretty good job of voice-to-text. So it gives us pretty reasonable transcriptions, which we can again separate into essentially rep and customer. And then from there, now you've got the entirety of the back and forth that happened on any given call into kind of a customer service line or a call center line that can then be, then we can apply some NLP techniques. So we can do some keyword or key phrase extraction and look at what that looks like across various conversations, and over time. We can perform sentimenting to try to understand, are people calling in because they are upset with an issue that is going on with the product that they purchased, or what are the reasons that for those kinds of calls that call in, and then we can also feed that into a custom model, which is actually what we did in that case, is we fed it into a custom topic model that was able to then categorize reasons behind a call. Once we have all of that data in a way that we can then use it for all of these purposes, and then once we combine all these different factors, at the end of the day, and we're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of calls that can be fed into this pipeline, transcribed, have all the NLP applied to it, and then go through and pull all of those results together into, say a BI dashboard. And then it allows somebody from, from our client to just jump on and be able to look at, okay, call volume and sentiment over time. How is that trending? What is that looking like? What's the average call time? What's the average talk time? Because we have those too. We have audio cues for the diarization that gets done there for the agent versus the customer. How much time does the agent spend talking? How much time does the customer spend talking? How much time is dead air while somebody's looking something up? Is that an issue? And filter calls by topic. So looking at all calls by whatever topic, by people that were requesting a return for a faulty product, and what was the overall sentiment of those, or common key phrases. If I'm looking at calls that are related to returns due to product defect or malfunction, what are the common keywords, key phrases there, and gives us an idea of what people are calling in to report problems with as far as their products. And it can even go to that level. But allows them to take a lot of different potential slices and and set up areas for improvement.
That's such a cool example. I've seen this done 10 different ways, but with that payload of the call recordings, used to associate with the buyer journey stage, that's how content strategists and SEOs are going to take this and turn this into things I can do with that. I mean, if you're talking about the collective of all your call center, I mean, that may be all, you may have most of those people own your product, right? Well, that could become, the cornerstone content for your support system. That could become your, getting ahead of that with content, showing common solutions, resolutions, getting ahead of those things. Also guiding product, initiatives, whether it be to solve a problem. But if maybe these are sales calls too, right? Then you can get into what are the most common pain points addressed? What are the most common value matches? So think about that entire funnel and how you can apply this to your business. And I think that you'll find out a lot of this turns into a content strategy effort in the end. But yeah.
Yep, that's a good point. And I think with, and as you mentioned, understanding what some of the topics covered on these calls are, both from, the high level standpoint, but also if it turns out that we're able to, model and determine that a significant chunk of these are people that are calling in that are existing customers that are really just having trouble finding a part number from a catalog that you've put out there, there's room for improvement there that has now been identified, and you can both help out your customer, your existing customers, to keep them a lot happier and not having to spend their time calling in to request somebody look up a part number for them, and save time for your call center folks as well.
No, that's a great observation. And if somebody's typing in part numbers, somebody's typing in their problem into a search engine, most likely they're probably doing that in addition to calling, or some, like 10 people are typing in and one person calls, whatever you figure out the real ratio is. If they're finding that information not on your website, that's a problem you probably want to remediate. If everybody's calling in, they're finding it from maybe it could be a competitor, it could be a community, it could be a forum, it could be some other source of truth. Don't you want to be that source of truth? How can we get there? I love that example. But you've also worked with user-generated content, right? So you worked with comments and those types of things, or what have you done in that regard? I guess a lot of it related to sentiment analysis, or other things.
There is definitely a lot along the lines of sentiment analysis, and there are a number of tools out there. I mean, all the major cloud providers have tools in place to be able to do sentimenting once you get things to text, if they don't start as text. But yeah, we've worked on other projects there as well that involve companies that are routinely collecting customer survey data and feedback. So that may include a kind of combination data in a lot of cases, right? So we'll have actual numerical ratings that were filled out as part of those kinds of surveys, as well as the actual full text of each of the different customers' comments there. So that allows us to be able to then go through and apply again NLP to that text that is there, and now we have that along with some more structured data that we can allow to be sliced in different ways. So for customers that are below a certain rating that would be considered potentially dissatisfied, what are the common themes that emerge as to why, to try to give some additional insight as to why that may be the case. And in certain cases for those kinds of surveys, sure, there may be drop-down menus available that can make allow certain values that have been preset. But if those are not capturing all possibilities, then that's not going to be as useful as being able to mine some of that free text feedback to be able to understand what is actually driving the person or customer to leave the ratings that they are. And similarly, to try to improve or increase the, we looked at Net Promoter Score, looking at people that are out there with a very high opinion of your company and are going to be promoting it to others, and a lot can come from that. What are people appreciating? What are the practices that we should be making sure to continue as a company? Because these are the things that we do get positive feedback on directly from our customers.
Awesome. For anyone that's not familiar with NPS, Net Promoter Score, commonly it's a product usage measurement. Typically, you'll see it manifest in a 0 to 10 bar while you're using something. When you click on that, it feeds into the system. You have a profile. It has a number. There's data about time sensitive. There's also, who you are, what your profile is, all gets connected to that. And it's how team members, like data scientists and product management teams, will typically benchmark their offering, benchmark releases of features, et cetera. So I love that example. You were using NPS explicitly kind of in that format, right?
Correct. Yeah, and that was our client was very focused on trying to take a look at looking at those scores and then the associated comments to see what it could do to improve the NPS metric. Just knowing that the promoters that it did have out there are, I think the metric that we had was 6 times as likely to buy, and obviously detractors or people that are unsatisfied. Not only will not purchase, but are also responsible for a large percentage of negative word of mouth or convincing other people to go elsewhere, things like that. So what can we do to address some of the concerns that are being shown by people who are less satisfied?
Oh, that just gives me chills. When I was in college, I did I went to Georgia Tech in the Stone Age, so it was 97 to 01. But I did I did usability theory. I did research on questionnaire bias, and it was all manual. I mean, it was so manual. It was so if-then. To think about that, you can actually do that now, 20 years later, and be super confident in like evaluating responses to surveys, evaluating bias in the survey, associating that with CRM data, associating that with product management data. It's a different world than being able to holistically evaluate questionnaire bias, and how that might drive. But do you ever think about that with surveys and with user generated content, that it might be biased about who it brings in? Like you mentioned, the drop downs that are included, maybe missing choices, may force someone into a selection.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And anything that we, as a part of any effort that we undertake, as a part of any project that we are a part of, that is one of the big focuses is on keeping an eye out and actively looking for any potential bias there. So setting up the feedback mechanisms and surveys is generally not something that we have been directly involved with creating on our side. So those are likely things that may already be in place. So it's usually for us more a matter of taking a look at what is already in existence and just trying to make sure that we understand, could this be introducing some kind of bias? And obviously that's a major theme within any data science effort and applies to any data science project, is looking back at both the source data and especially any pre-trained models that are being used, because they will very heavily carry the bias of any of the data that they were trained on. So that's something that we always are paying attention to.
You mean you're only showing your NPS survey to users with multiple logins who happen to use this advanced feature? Oh, yeah. Congratulations, bro. I've seen them all, so that's fun. So some of the other things that you work a lot on We talked about survey comments, transcripts, NPS. What types of things that have you done that have tied back to ROI? I know that you were talking about kind of spending habits. We in the past have had guests from, and I've worked with a company called Mad Kudu, who looks at return on investment, predicting lead quality. What types of things have you done for kind of trying to guess whether someone has the ability to buy or B2B spending habits?
Yeah, absolutely. There are probably a couple examples there. I think the one that I would focus on was a B2B case that was a project that we did work on, and working with a large manufacturing company to understand what their not only understand and look at historical customer spend, but using a number of different factors to both identify at-risk customer spend looking forward and actually attempt with a reasonable degree of certainty to predict a range of future customer spend by again their B2B customers. So in that case, we actually used combo data, which I think we have found to be the most powerful. So while we do have some again customer feedback coming from I believe it was quarterly surveys at that point, if I'm remembering correctly, but again, free text fields that we're dealing with some of the NLP methods that we can use to try to extract some meaning and understanding from that data, to understand it, in that case, again, extract keywords, and just even grouping those by frequency to understand what some of the trends are that are coming out of those helps once you start dealing with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these, and working with them in aggregate can understand what the trends are there that would emerge. But then also combining that with the data that we have that is structured, that we have that is their actual, the customer ratings. Again, I know we already kind of touched on that with the previous use case. But then the other interesting part about this one was particularly actually using some of the internal metrics, operational metrics for our client as it relates to different divisions who work with these customers. So looking at a lot of their timeliness and delivery metrics and things like that we could roll into all of that analysis, and as well as looking at the historical customer spend for each one of these individual different customers. It required training a lot of different models, and there was actually one dedicated model for each one of these customers that we went to do to try to make sure that we could capture and understand what inputs are most relevant to each customer to determine what their activity might look like going forward. So to be able to take all of those things together and create a model that would take a look at those and actually predict, and again, with a window of probability or certainty, I guess I should say, that diverges as you go further and further into the future. But with looking at just for next fiscal year spend, what might we expect to see from a given customer based on that, and again put together a front end BI dashboard that was able to display those predictions on a customer by customer basis with filters and selections that were available to allow selection of a single customer, or look at roll-ups from a, say, division level, for the client that we were working with on that, and understand what some of those trends look like over time, what the expectation would be looking forward there, and summarization of all of those key internal operational metrics that we had used as kind of inputs to the model, but just to be able to see all of those at a glance and have everything cross-filter to each other based on their selections there. It allows them to delve in and try to get some very pointed insights depending on where they want to be focusing.
Wow. So when you say where they want to be focusing, to what end are you looking to influence? Is it so they'll know? Well, you answered. Yeah. To what end are you looking to influence? Is it they're targeting that market? Is that they're developing enablement materials? Developing, what types of ways can you respond to such a study? I mean, my brain just goes crazy when I hear about it. So there's just so many things that you can coach internally.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of potential. So part of what, and a lot of what our process is to make sure that we, understand what what our client is valuing, what they are looking for, what the focus is, and where the the value is that we can add coming in to be able to work with them to solve, whether it's solve a problem or answer a question. And depending on how specific that is, will very much guide the the approach that we take to make sure that the output from the work that we are putting in there allows them to be able to address what it is that they want to be addressing. So a lot of the time for us, unless it is a very specific question that is being wanting to be answered there on the client side, what we'll do is put together as we did in this case, a BI dashboard that would allow for drill down into whatever area of interest may be there for the client. So in this case, it was the ability, to look at the organization at the highest level, but then also the granularity of data in the background that is feeding that front end that would allow them to drill down. Hey, we want to really look at how we may expect the spend to be for this specific division going forward for the next year, and then be able to do that immediately, just have that ability there and baked in, because and those preferences or the need to be able to shift and have that look at different areas within their business may change over time, right? So building in the ability to drill down to any given one at any given time has a lot of value there as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's really exciting. I just think about if you know so much, if you know that something has a correlation to that group, I mean, what it can do is there might be some internal team members that believe it to be some other truth that this can help along as well. So I've seen this a lot in my career. A large portion of it was in lead management, lead nurturing, lead scoring, in that world where it was, this is who our best leads are. And then you do the research and you do this now using artificial intelligence to fast track. And you're like, well, actually, they aren't actually the buyer. Maybe they're on a team which has a different buyer, or they're not a good fit at all. Do you ever think about those types of implementations?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that brings up a really important point. So especially in the cases where you are, say, applying one or more machine learning models to come up with an answer to some kind of a question, and the answer that ends up coming out at the end of all of that is potentially different than what was expected, really highlights the need there to be able to provide the interpretability so that somebody will trust the results. And that is especially true because, of course, human nature is going to be to try to discount results that don't potentially agree with the preconceived notion, right? If I have a model that ends up showing me something other than what I'm expecting to see, the immediate response will be to question or criticize something about it and say, no, I don't buy it. Something is going on there that isn't correct. So, and I know you had made the point already, looking at just, if-then statements, which essentially, looking at say a decision tree model or even a random forest, that is something that offer a lot of explainability, but can get within a very short period of time, add a ton of complexity to the point where it would not be reasonable to have a human go through and parse all the logic that's being used to make a decision. So even in those cases, it becomes very difficult to try to go in and understand. So one thing that we have used there and especially in cases where that transparency was critical to drive the trust in a solution that we're working on, is if the modeling is sufficiently challenging enough that we cannot go with maybe some of the more interpretable and simplistic options for simple regression or something like that would be very easy to try to build explanation for, what we can do is apply some post hoc explainability, and there are tools out there that can do that. So even working with an extremely complex model where the inner workings are opaque, even potentially to the people that are going through and creating and training the model, which is the case in a lot of cases, there are packages there and solutions that allow, with enough data points, enough inputs and outputs from a model that is in place, to try to not exactly reverse engineer, but to understand what inputs drive what kind of outputs, and then allow for certain examples. And literally, it can be a single example, and you run this for as many as you want. But helps to prove out, hey, here is a set of inputs. Here is the output that the model provided in this case, and based on this post hoc explainability tool that we are using, here is the relative importance of each of these different fields, and here is roughly how the model looked at it to come out with this result. And with that, it takes it to a level that somebody is able to maybe look at that and say, okay, I can see why it would think this is very important and this is very important. And it can even give directionality as well. So a number being low may lend a model, it may tell a model to go in a certain direction, whereas another variable would send it in the other direction and fight that result. So understanding directionality there as well, being able to give that visual feedback for specific examples can start to help to drive a little bit of understanding, and with that starts to develop the trust in the solution that's being put into place.
Nice. No, that's the perfect explanation of that whole process. And I think one thing I'll experience frequently is, I kind of say this in a trite way, but the result of really well done work, like you describe what you do, is something that feels easy. It can feel obvious, but it can also be changing in that you have confidence in that obvious. So you might go, and a lot of people use this in product management for PQL development. So what a product qualified lead is in our system. So gosh, I'm going to get this wrong, but everybody's familiar with Slack. Slack's PQL, I think, is when a team sends more than, I'm going to use the number, it's N,000 messages. It's highly likelihood they have a likelihood to buy. Well, there's technology used to guide that PQL. Like, would you have picked the right thing that those users do? Would you have picked the right amount manually? No way. But when you hear, oh yeah, when a team sends 3,000 messages, they're likely to become a purchase Slack. It feels so simple. So it's like, you think about what is that for your business. When you ask Siri a question and they get it right, you're like, oh, well, yeah, obviously they would know, what's the weather in Istanbul. But it's like super complicated how they got to that, and through a voice to translation and everything. So I like to say, like, if it feels real simple, think about the confirmation that it's given you and the value. And I think a lot of teams that are not familiar with AI, they get that output and they're just like, yeah, this is simple. It wasn't very valuable because it's obvious, or something like that. Do you ever experience those types of situations?
Can be, which is not, it's a mixed bag. It's not always the worst thing either. I think it is more challenging perhaps to, as we kind of already discussed, is getting the result back that is unexpected, and if not well enough explained, it will call a lot of things into question and require a lot of just additional, work and follow up to be able to prove out. But again, points to potential, lack of trust in some of those scenarios, and sometimes rightly so. And you have to build in, enough to impart that kind of trust in the solution that you're putting out there. But having somebody come back and get a response or get a result that is aligned with their understanding and expectations, and potentially even with explainability, all the reasons line up and make sense, is great in my mind, because in a lot of cases that it's not always going to happen, right? Right. For a given solution that is put into place, that'll be an ongoing thing, right? So it's not generally, anyway, not a one time we're going to run this and get some results from it. And if the more times that happens and seems to line up with, yeah, logically that's what I would think, and this all makes sense, that's all building that trust, right? So that when something comes down the pipes and is unexpected, there is certainly the question of, hey, why did this happen? Why is this the case? Is this worth looking into? And absolutely it is, to prove out, to continue to prove out why, the effectiveness of the solution that is in place, and is it applying logic reasonably to come up with that solution. And the hope in those cases, and it does absolutely happen and is really cool when it does, is to be able to prove out that, yeah, it is a valid, decision, prediction, response, whatever, being provided by the solution that was put into place. and here is the reasoning behind it. And you do get those light bulb moments where, oh, that makes sense. And I don't think I would have ever considered that those factors would be that important or in this way to be able to come out with this. But that's really cool. And that's kind of what you live for, putting these things into place, is being able to uncover some of those scenarios that it would never have necessarily occurred to somebody just looking at it manually.
I mean, one example in MarketMuse case was we need more online support coverage. For a long time, we didn't have coverage in certain time windows. But as our business grows and as we go in, having 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 users on the platform of various shapes and sizes, locations, we realized, oh my gosh, our support, the vectors for clients in their progression with the company were, if they had support requests that went into into a bucket that then got returned, what was the impact of those things? So being able to train machine learning models to give us insights on all those types of learning, don't sell into, I'll say Antarctica, because I don't want to I don't want to discriminate against the location, but it might tell you things to apply resources towards or not apply resources towards. In MarketMuse case, the platform itself tells you, based on machine learning like this, what to write. If you let Bob write an article about NLP on the blog, it's going to do well, right? That's the kind of coaching, the automation that we're providing. But what other types of business impacts? What are those aha outcomes? I've explained a few of my personal experience. What are the ones that you get excited about? What are the ones that you're pumped that you drove with projects, or ones that you were surprised how much of an impact they had, maybe?
Sure. And I thank you for your confidence on the success of my eventual blog on NLP, which I don't know if I've done one of those or not. Actually, I'm not sure it made the trending list there, but yeah, as you said, and I think I mentioned it is some of those unexpected results, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. You have to be a little bit careful, because obviously once those, in cases where there are those unexpected results, there is the tendency to question how they were arrived at. So making sure that you have the proper pieces in place to be able to have the explainability to show, hey, here are the step by step, or to the best of your ability to show how something how a conclusion was arrived at, allows for a lot more believability when somebody is looking at an outcome that maybe is unexpected. I'm trying to think through if there are any specific instances there. Really what I look for, at least during the course of projects, as on the data science side, I look at as exciting is when we are starting modeling and starting to be able to get some results and look at maybe trends of aggregates there, that and be able to find trends that will absolutely and clearly line up with what is known to be reality or outside forces that would have been playing a clear impact on on the situation. I guess the first example that comes to mind is obviously COVID impacts across the board with a lot of the data that we've been working with over the last couple of years. But being able to look at historical data that predates that for a client, and start to look at trends for various metrics, and seeing a significant difference right at that cutoff in say March of 2020, in one direction or the other, depending on what kind of data it is that we are looking at, or what kind of predictions that we are potentially looking at for training models, and being able to see those reflections of known real world events that would have made sense, and at least giving us the indications that we are on the right track as we go through and work on these different things. But certainly being able to provide some insights to our clients that would not have otherwise been arrived at without the ability to look at a lot of this data in aggregate and provide it in such a way that it can be sliced down, to finding out that, hey, okay, we are seeing some issues with whatever the key metric may be here, and maybe a way that we had not looked at it was sliced by this certain call it a division or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to look at it that way and easily just toggle between those different things, allows for that, a trend there to be uncovered that was previously unknown.
Yeah.
I think those are kind of the cool parts of it when those insights happen.
No, that's cool. I like to say it's the why. AI often gives you the why for some of these things too. So it's to say, why did you make that business decision? In our case, it's like, why did you choose to create this content item versus that content item? Why did you choose to put this section into this piece? Not always easy to state, right? Sometimes in the history of the world, from a content story, it's a lot of times it's subjective, or I'm the editor. I tell you what to do, integrating data into those solutions, even at the, if you're going to go write an article about, content marketing strategy, you better talk about buyer personas and target audiences, or else it's really not that comprehensive, and you start, as people trust models, what happens? Like, you get more confident, you're open to new projects. Have you seen teams who work with you, like, let's say on the NPS example, where I think you drove NPS scores up 20% with that manufacturing company? Have you seen teams come back for more? Like, what else can you do? Or do they have projects in mind? How do they think about new projects and actually implementing, because I know you go through a workshop with every client, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess it kind of runs the gamut, right? We have certainly some clients that we've worked with that may have, one or more champions for applying and using these kinds of solutions within the organization. I think more commonly what we see is a fair bit of forward thinking throughout, perhaps everybody within an organization, and bringing us in and already being initially on board with the plan to look at what might they be able to do with their data, and in a lot of cases specifically looking to answer a specific question, or solve a certain challenge with what they have already there, and they know there is some capability in determining what can they do, how can they use their data. And a lot of what we see is going through with successful projects that we will absolutely have a lot of what we do is repeat work with clients that we have been working with for years and years at this point, that we have teams that have seen the capabilities, have seen the potential of what we can do. And a lot of times they already have internal initiatives that maybe were attempted at some other point in the past and didn't quite make it there, or just ideas that they want to be able to explore, but there often are preliminary steps. There are things that need to be done with their data to get it to a point where it's robust enough to be able to throw some modeling techniques at it and be able to answer certain questions for them. So there's certainly a lot of that as well. But yeah, we see a lot of excitement, and definitely having some successful efforts there with projects that we worked on have absolutely led to more excitement, and then the ideas do start to flow as well from various people that work for our clients that come up with these ideas, or have had them maybe kicking around for a while, and figure out if we can find a way to use our skill set to help them with it.
So what of these, so a question from the audience, what of these would be things that are, available tools that they can purchase or use, that you use in your kind of stack, versus ones that are proprietary, versus, like, how is there, there's certainly enough courses on Python, learn to use Python if you're an SEO, learn to use Python if you're a content marketer. But what kind of packages would you, if you were putting together a starter kit for somebody who was a content marketer or a publisher, and they got the wild hair that they wanted to kind of give this a shot? What would you say would be a kind of a base package of things they'd want in their disposable? Obviously, you can start with MarketMuse, but what's 2 through N?
Yeah, so there are a couple of paths there. As you mentioned, we mainly work with Python. So there are a number of different NLP libraries that are available, all of which are free to open open source, everything that are easily, installable and usable immediately without any cost. So it is the scaling up to be able to be comfortable enough within Python to use a lot of these tools is probably the biggest spend there, is just the time and effort that it would take to gain the familiarity needed to work with them. So that is certainly one route, and it can be very useful there. And everything that you might need to do, if we're talking, we've been focused a lot on the NLP side with with the number of tool sets that are available there. There's absolutely enough there to be able to do any modeling that you would want to be able to do. But again, keep in mind, using any of those is, and there are, documentation out there for each one of them, and guides out there, and all kinds of, videos and how-tos and things to help you out along that way. But it does take some time to get familiar enough, if you are talking about just, from the ground up coding on the Python side, to get to the point of being able to do some of the NLP stuff within that environment. But it is absolutely doable. Probably the most basic that I would say is natural language toolkit that goes along with Python, and a few other key libraries to be able to use once you start to break textual data into more tabular data, as you start to apply those techniques, using pandas, which is partially where we get our name as a business, but as a library to work with tabular data within Python as one of the ways to do that. And then anywhere from natural language toolkit, GenSim, Spacey, there are a lot of tools out there to use within Python to accomplish those. But as I said, it does take a little bit of time to to scale up, to be comfortable and going through and using those tools. There are also, and maybe to pivot from that a bit, all of the major cloud platforms that are out there have a lot of tools to apply a lot of those same solutions, or at least versions of them. And as far as just playing around with it, and a lot of that can be done fairly cheaply as well, and some of it within a graphical interface rather than having to go through and do all of the code yourself. So that is one way to do it. So you kind of, pick your favorite between Google and IBM and Amazon as far as major providers there that all have their own set of tools to be able to do various NLP related tasks. And obviously all have the cloud storage as well to be able to host and store any of the data you would be using to do that. Cloud storage is cheap. And certainly we use both that and cloud processing, which is not quite as cheap depending on how heavy of a data set you're using and what you're doing with it, but certainly reasonable enough to be able to play with, and a lot that offer free trials out there to be able to play around with in a smaller environment, to have the lower code option perhaps there, being able to do at least some of those actions using their graphical interface instead of having to do code for all of them. But certainly building the familiarity with Python on that side can go a long way, because sooner or later you likely need to incorporate at least some of that into a workflow.
Right. Nice. Yeah, that's such a great description. Everybody play that on repeat. But yeah, Spacey, Spacey pandas, get that into your arsenal. We are adding a URL processor into GrepWords API, which GrepWords API is a great data source. GrepWords is a subsidiary of MarketMuse for keyword data, for search engine result page data. We're going to be adding a bunch of features to that, but also a URL processor. So if you've got any ideas or needs for data, also be looking for data providers too, because sometimes you can weave those two together really well. So you can take in Google Search Console API, Google Analytics API, some other data sources like GrepWords, and smush them together and then start to apply some of the things that Bob's talking about. We did a previous webinar with the team from iPullRank, and they integrated grep data with a number of the libraries you just discussed and turned it into some amazing things in weeks, not years, which in the past these were things that would be huge uphill battles. And huge climbs, and being able to piece them together, it's not cheating. if it's easy.
No, for sure. And a lot of these are
That's the
now,
key. A lot of people
pre
think it's got to be hard,
and a lot of these are, offer pre-trained models out there that have been trained on hundreds of millions of pieces of, especially textual data, talking about NLP related items there, that you could just literally grab and use. And, as long as what the data that you are working with is reasonably similar enough to, to what it was trained on, then you're, essentially good to go there and can get a lot of value out of something that has been pre-trained. And obviously there are situations with very unique or specific data where you would have to look at a custom solution. And that's probably where more the working very heavily and customizing and training your own model potentially in Python may make more sense. But using any of those cloud providers and their solutions. And I would also, you kind of mentioned there, if you are a part of an organization and you are looking to see what solutions you might be able to put into place and what value you might be able to get out of it, if you are already invested as an organization with, usually they're aligning themselves with one of those providers within an organization, right? Now, as an outside party that works with various clients that use any one of those, we have to be able to pivot between all of them. But within a single company, if somebody is looking to be able to develop their their skills and to try some things out, okay, focus in on the provider that you may already be using as a company and see what tools they have available to help you do some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think this, it's a great way, and I know we're close on the end, but it's something to think about is the content strategy, content marketing, search marketing, data science communities are pretty awesome in their desire to share. With regard to data science, I always find that the tech SEO community is just really open to sharing and communicative. So if you've got a project, ask, put it out there. Say, hey, what platforms would you use for this? You'll get some wave of people selling stuff, but you'll also get people who are going to give you like what they would do. What would their tech stack be? And feel free to reach out to Bob. I'm sure he'll respond, or me if you've got something like that in mind and you're not sure exactly what Play-Doh to put together to make it work. There's certainly wonderful solutions out there, packages by we use Gong, for example, as a provider for our sales initiatives, which has a lot of these components. But there's also ways to wire something together manually pretty quickly, whether you're a small shop or a large entity, and really make a major impact. And obviously, to call Pandata to put together those projects for your company if you don't know where to go, or you want this to become something where you're going to be the internal champion that brings this to your business. And that's the most exciting thing for me when I hear those types of stories with you and your teams and teams like yours. But I'll give you the last word. But first, 15% off standard webinar VIP. Go check it out. If you're interested in our premium offering, you want to look at your content inventory, what to create, what to update, give me a ring or a DM on Twitter, Jeff@marketmuse.com. Bob, how can people reach you? What do you want people to know as far as the last word on artificial intelligence?
Oof, that's a lot of pressure. So as far as reaching me, Robert@pandata.co or on LinkedIn is a decent way as well. Also, hello@pandata.co, and those are our general email. So for anybody looking, as you said, to work with having data, not knowing what to do with it, thinking that there may be either in general terms something that they might be able to do with it, or having specific goals with it. One of the first steps that we always end up taking is, as you mentioned, going through and taking that first pass, understanding what it is you're looking for, what it is that your organization is looking for, what kind of data that we are working with, go through that AI workshop, determine whether we feel that is a fit or not. So that's certainly something that we're always open and interested to do with companies that are looking for innovative ways to be able to to work with their data. And absolutely would still encourage anybody and everybody who is interested in in playing around with it a little bit more on their own. There are friendly communities out there, a lot of tutorials out there on being able to do any of that stuff on your own. The learning curve to be able to pick some of that stuff up is not terrible. Obviously, I look back a few years, I had very little exposure to programming or anything else before that. Definitely took 6 months of fairly intensive work and a lot of practice since then to kind of get upskilled and into that. But it is absolutely possible to do, and certainly possible to get into a specific area of that and play around with it a little bit and see what's out there, because there's some very cool stuff.
Awesome. Do it. Get it on your computer. Figure it out. Get someone to help you. All right. Thank you so much, Bob. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to talking to you in the future. And thanks everyone for joining us and providing such awesome questions. Thanks everyone.